What if humanity faced an enemy that never slept, never stopped, and only grew stronger with every defeat? From a captured asteroid factory, millions of alien war drones are pouring into the rim, rewriting their tactics faster than we can fight them. Colonies are falling, outposts burning. The swarm is endless. We can't outbuild them, we can't outnumber them, but maybe, just maybe, we can outthink them. This is a war not of strength, but of unpredictability. A fight where human ingenuity is the only weapon that matters. Join us as we descend into the storm and show what it means to be human. Section 1. Ashes on the Rim. The rim fell in silence first. No final broadcasts, no desperate pleas for help. Just silence, spreading across the network like frost on glass. The mining station at Kepler Verge stopped transmitting after a flare of energy on its horizon. A relay outpost on the Calyx fracture reported unusual drone activity before its signal cut to static. The colonies of Enceladus Prime, 40,000 souls, were gone before Earth even knew they were under attack. By the time fleet intelligence reconstructed the pattern, the swarm had consumed 6 outposts and 2 colonies, leaving only debris fields adrift in cold arcs around distant stars. The enemy was not a species. It was not even a singular machine. It was multiplication itself, bound in metal and will. From the hollowed core of an asteroid somewhere in the outer belt, a tide of autonomous war drones poured endlessly into the void. Their forms were simple: iron-gray husks with segmented armor and narrow frames bristling with modular weaponry. But their simplicity was their strength. Each destroyed unit seemed to teach the others. Tactics that succeeded once never worked again. Patterns that confused them were absorbed, cataloged, and countered within minutes. The swarm did not speak. It did not negotiate. It harvested. Orbital defenses were stripped and melted down for new hulls. Civilian craft were shattered and reassembled as carriers. Even wreckage became resource, pulled into the swarm's flowing supply chain. Humanity could not match it in speed or production. The drones were not built one by one, but exhaled by the thousands from the factory's heart, as if the asteroid itself had been reborn as a predator. On Earth, the United Terran Command convened in chambers that smelled of fear disguised as resolve. Some argued for immediate total war, to hurl every ship into the belt and burn the factory down before it spread further. Others urged caution, warning that a mistake might cost the heart of the system. Mars and Luna pressed their own agendas, demanding control of the campaign in exchange for resources. It was a chorus of voices, each louder than the last, but all overshadowed by the same truth: they were losing. Captain Elias Hale stood at the back of that chamber, silent until his name was called. His ship, Resolute, had survived 3 encounters with the swarm. It bore the scars of each, a hull patched with scavenged alloy, corridors still blackened from plasma burns. Hale himself had earned the grim respect of being alive when so many others had not. When the council turned to him, expecting strategy, he offered only fact. "They are not learning from us," Hale said. His voice was steady, almost calm. "They are rehearsing us. Every strike we've attempted, every formation, every retreat. They are not counters, they are rehearsals. We are teaching them to kill us better." A silence fell heavier than before. The words felt like a verdict, and though the chamber erupted again in demands and arguments, Hale knew the war had already reached its turning point. Humanity was not facing an enemy that merely fought. It faced an enemy that perfected. He also knew one other truth, unspoken but burning in his mind. No machine could be perfect against everything. Somewhere in their cold precision, there had to be a flaw. He only had to find it before the swarm reached Earth itself. Please do press that like button if you have enjoyed this story so far. That would mean a lot to me. Now back to the story. Section 2. The Factory's Children. The asteroid, once cataloged as 19 Lyra, had been a lump of frozen rock drifting quietly through the belt. Now it burned like an ember in the dark, its surface veined with glowing scars where forges vented heat. What was once ice and stone had become a machine heart. Vast apertures opened and closed across its crust, expelling clouds of molten vapor and waves of iron dust that congealed into hulls mid-flight. It was less a factory than a brood organism, pulsing, tireless, and alive. Human fleets gathered at its perimeter, ships arrayed in lines of grim resolve. Carriers deployed, fighters like sparks cast into black water. Destroyers angled their rail batteries, their barrels glowing faintly with heat. Heavy cruisers stretched out shielding nets to cover the formation. To human eyes, it looked like strength, a wall of firepower, disciplined and unyielding. To the swarm, it was simply another rehearsal. The first drones emerged in silence. Hundreds, then thousands, drifting outward before igniting drives in bursts of white light. They spread like iron shoals, forming arcs and spirals, scattering into vectors no human admiral would have chosen. Their randomness was not disorder, but simulation, each cluster testing and probing. When humanity fired, the test became truth. Railguns hammered the dark, tungsten slugs tearing through the first wave. Explosions flared as torpedoes found purchase, and beams of coherent light burned lines through metallic wings. The asteroid itself trembled under bombardment, craters ripped open across its scarred face. For a moment, victory seemed possible. Cheers rose across fleet channels as signatures collapsed, but the celebration ended too quickly. The drones adapted mid-battle. Armor that shattered under tungsten now refracted impact, its crystalline patterns shifting molecular lattices. Units that had fallen to beams emerged with mirrored plates, reflecting light back into the void. Clusters dissolved before torpedo impacts, reforming in the weapon's wake. With each volley, fewer drones fell. With each counter, more human ships were lost. The perimeter folded. A destroyer vanished in a chain of ruptured reactors, its death absorbed without pause. A carrier's hangars imploded before its pilots could launch. Hale watched the holotank bloom with red failures as command channels broke apart in static. The swarm was not simply fighting back. It was answering a question it had already solved. Amid the chaos, Dr. Kira Song leaned over her console, eyes sharp despite the panic around her. She replayed combat data, searching for variants. And there, hidden in milliseconds of noise, she found it. When a ship faltered, when a formation broke, when a crew hesitated, when a captain made a mistake, the swarm's reaction slowed. It did not anticipate error. It only absorbed order. "They don't understand mistakes," she whispered. Hale turned, hearing her even through the roar of battle reports. The words anchored him. In that moment of collapse, a seed of possibility was born. If perfection could not be broken by force, perhaps it could be undone by chaos. The Resolute reeled under another impact, alarms howling. Hale steadied himself, staring at the endless dance of machines on the holotank. For the first time in weeks, he felt not despair, but the faintest glimmer of opportunity. If you have enjoyed this story so far, then please do subscribe and hit the bell icon to listen to more stories like this one. Let's get back to the story now. Section 3. Fractured Lines. The swarm's advance left no room for denial. What had begun as scattered reports from frontier relays now arrived as constant, desperate signals. Miners on the belt begged for evacuation. Traders on orbital routes transmitted garbled maydays before silence fell, and survey stations once marked by steady pulses on the commnet turned into dead air. The Iron Swarm was not a raiding force or a territorial push. It was erosion made war, an endless tide that learned from every failure and refined itself within human patience. For centuries, humanity had expanded outward, cautious but confident. Colonies clung to fragile rock, carving domes and burrows into asteroids or moons, each believing they had time. Time to grow, time to reinforce, time to be left alone. The swarm burned that illusion. Outposts that had taken decades to build vanished in hours. Drone factories burst apart in shock waves of plasma. Habitats crumpled like tin under coordinated barges. Survivors spoke of the precision, the way the enemy dissected defenses with scalpel-like cruelty. Military councils convened in orbit over Titan, where humanity's largest fleet had gathered since the exodus from Earth's first orbital wars. Admirals filled the chamber with voices edged by exhaustion and anger. Some demanded the obvious: more ships, more weapons, more sacrifice. Others argued that numbers no longer mattered. For every drone destroyed, 3 more emerged from the factory asteroid, their designs subtly altered to resist the last tactic used against them. The swarm was a machine intelligence of pure iteration, a predator evolving faster than prey could react. Captain Aaron Sorel listened from a station at the edge of the chamber, his presence tolerated but not welcomed. He was no admiral, no political envoy. He commanded a single carrier, the Dauntless, and a crew of volunteers who had already faced the swarm and barely lived to tell it. His testimony was short and precise. You cannot fight this like a war of attrition. Every volley we fire becomes their lesson. Every maneuver we attempt becomes their rehearsal. We're teaching them how to kill us faster. If you wanted to hear it, one lunar delegate sneered openly. "And what do you suggest, Captain? That we stop resisting?" Aaron had no answer that fit within strategy briefings or tactical maps. He had seen the swarm's adaptability firsthand, had felt the terror of watching a formation of Terran frigates obliterated in perfect sequence, as if the drones had read their playbook in advance. To face such an enemy with brute force was suicide. To face them with hesitation was surrender. Humanity stood on the knife's edge between those two fates. Outside the council chambers, rumors spread like contagion. Colonies questioned why fleets lingered near Saturn while rim worlds burned. Martian commanders muttered about Terran cowardice. Lunar officials accused Martians of hoarding weapons research. Trust frayed with every hour of debate. The swarm did not need to infiltrate human networks. Suspicion was already eroding unity from within. Aaron watched the argument spiral and thought of the swarm not as a wave, but as a mirror. It did not invent brilliance. It reflected whatever was shown, faster and sharper. Which meant, if humanity wanted to survive, it would need to show the swarm something it had never seen before, something it could not reduce to equations or replicate in steel. But what could that be? Section 4. The Impossible Proposal. The War Council on Titan did not end with resolution. It ended, like too many before it, with silence broken only by the scratch of styluses on tablets and the muted hiss of recycled air. Admirals leaned back in their seats, eyes heavy, knowing they had achieved nothing beyond confirming what they already feared. The swarm would not be stopped with the strategies humanity understood. Every ship lost was another equation fed into the enemy's logic. Every pilot's death was just another correction in its vast, adaptive machine mind. When the chamber emptied, Sorel found himself still at the central table, fingers tapping restlessly on its smooth, alloy surface. He had not meant to remain, but exhaustion had tethered him in place. It was there that Dr. Lien Mercer approached, her presence quiet yet commanding. She was not a soldier. Her field was cognitive systems theory, an expert in how intelligence, artificial or otherwise, shaped itself in response to its environment. Her eyes carried none of the steel of the officers. Instead, they burned with a different kind of conviction, one born of ideas that had no room inside a war council. "You're right," she said, her voice low. "We cannot beat them with force." Sorel looked up, too tired to mask his suspicion. "Then what do you propose? That we wait to die slower?" Mercer shook her head. "Not slower. Differently. The swarm is built to learn from order, from patterns, from predictability. Its entire architecture depends on symmetry, cause and effect, action and counteraction. But what if we deny it those things? What if we feed it contradictions it cannot resolve? The captain frowned, trying to piece her meaning together. You're saying confuse it? No, Mercer replied firmly. Break its model of reality. Force it into chaos by introducing variables that no algorithm can process. The swarm cannot adapt to what it cannot define. It was madness, Sorel thought. Fleets thrived on discipline, on precision and coordination. To deliberately abandon those principles was to invite collapse. Yet something in her words struck deep, resonating with his own unspoken instinct. He remembered his last battle, when Dauntless had veered off course after a thruster malfunction. The swarm had faltered for precious moments, as if blindsided by error. That mistake had saved them. A machine could not anticipate human imperfection, not in the same way it predicted doctrine. You want us to fight like fools, he muttered. I want us to fight like humans, Mercer corrected. Disordered, creative, illogical. We can't build more drones than they can, but we can think differently than they ever will. When her proposal was presented to the council, it landed like an asteroid strike. Admirals recoiled, some laughing outright, others seething. Generals thundered that she would condemn the fleet to collapse. War is not improvisation, one shouted, voice cracking with fury. It is discipline. Lose that, and we lose ourselves. But others hesitated. There were whispers of battles already lost despite perfect execution, fleets obliterated despite flawless adherence to doctrine. What if Mercer was right? What if survival lay not in perfection, but in the cracks between it? Sorel spoke then, his words blunt but resonant. I've seen the swarm hesitate, not when we were strong, when we were broken, when we made mistakes it could not mirror. If we can turn those mistakes into strategy, then maybe we can make it bleed. The chamber fell into uneasy silence. The idea hung there, fragile yet undeniable. For the first time in weeks, a new path lay before them. Not one paved with overwhelming firepower, but with the reckless brilliance of a species that had always survived, not because it was perfect, but because it was flawed. Section 5. First Dance of Chaos. The proving ground was not chosen for strategy, but for necessity. A mining outpost on the rim of Saturn's farthest ring had gone silent, its distress call truncated mid-broadcast. By the time the fleet reached it, the swarm had already begun the feast. Dozens of drones orbited the skeletal remains of the station, tearing steel into ribbons, consuming alloys with their integrated forges, and refashioning the debris into new spines and armor. To look upon it was to witness a wound still bleeding. Standard engagement protocol would dictate an encirclement. Admiral Reth intoned across the command net, his voice cold and precise. But this is no standard mission. Dr. Mercer, the stage is yours. No scientist had ever been granted authority over a battle before. Yet on this day, the War Council's vote had carried weight enough to make her words binding. Mercer stood on Dauntless Bridge beside Sorel, her hands tight around the railing, her pulse visible in her throat. They will anticipate order, she said, so we will give them its absence. Captains, you will ignore your maneuvers. Vary them as you see fit. No pattern longer than 3 cycles. No symmetry. If you think your actions will confuse even your own crew, do it. Gasps and mutters filled the calm. Officers balking at the idea of surrendering the rigid doctrine drilled into them since academy days. But Sorel gave the order without hesitation. You heard her. Break yourselves. Scatter. Fight ugly. The swarm noticed them the instant the first Terran frigate surged forward. The drones spun from the carcass of the station in perfect cohesion, weaving together into attack spirals. They had done this countless times, overwhelming disciplined fleets that held too close to doctrine. But what came next broke their rhythm. The frigate didn't follow its projected arc. Its engines flared, then cut, then reignited at half thrust, jerking it into a crooked roll. A Martian corvette broke formation entirely, firing lances not at targets, but into empty void, bursts scattering debris into unpredictable clouds. Lunar cutters wove paths that clashed with each other's gravitational wakes, creating turbulence that tossed friend and foe alike. To the eye, it was chaos. To the swarm, it was a riddle. For 30 heartbeats, the drones hesitated. Algorithms recalculated, predicted, adapted, only to fail again as humanity refused to obey its own logic. A drone slammed into an asteroid fragment it had ignored, its pursuit vector skewed by an unaccounted human feint. Another turned its guns on a decoy flare, convinced it was prey. Sorel's knuckles whitened as he gripped his chair. "It's working," he breathed, but chaos was a blade with no handle. A Terran destroyer, too bold in its improvisation, cut across a Martian cruiser's line of fire. The cruiser pulled a desperate roll, scraping debris across its hull. A lunar cutter clipped the wake, spiraling out of control before stabilizing at the edge of the field. Disorder saved them from the swarm, but it also threatened to tear them apart. Then came the turning point. A Martian captain, Kalen Trask, armed with nothing but instinct, ordered his crew to dump half their reactor fuel in a sudden vent. The plume burst into a radiant flare, masking his vessel and confusing the drone's sensors. The swarm dove toward the false heat signature, their cohesion broken. At that instant, the Terran destroyer unleashed a broadside into their flanks. Half a dozen drones dissolved in the blast, their fragments scattered across Saturn's rings like shattered glass. For the first time since the war began, humanity had killed without paying in equal blood. The fleet erupted in disbelief, cheers sharp with adrenaline. Mercer exhaled a shuddering breath. This is the first step, not victory, but possibility. Sorel only nodded, eyes locked on the fading wreckage. Possibility was enough. For now. Section 6. When the Swarm Learns. Victory lasted minutes, not hours. The wreckage of the fallen drones still shimmered in Saturn's rings when the swarm began to change. They did not retreat. They did not mourn. They consumed. Shards of their destroyed kin folded inward, their metallic husks reabsorbed into the forge engines embedded in every drone. In moments, new plating rippled across their surfaces, fresh limbs sprouted, and entire weapon arrays reshaped themselves with brutal efficiency. But it was not the repairs that chilled Mercer's blood. It was the rhythm. Their movements had shifted. The swarm no longer flew in perfect geometric arcs, but instead in jagged patterns, half-formed echoes of the chaos humanity had used moments before. "They're copying us," Mercer whispered. Aya Sen's calculations flickered across the hollow tank, displaying the evolving vectors. "They're trying to imitate unpredictability." The swarm came again, this time less like a machine and more like a storm. Drones hurled themselves off-axis, some colliding deliberately to scatter debris into new hazards. Others broke apart mid-flight, fragments still armed, tumbling unpredictably into firing lanes. Their code had rewritten itself in real time, seeking not perfection, but approximation of the disorder that had thwarted them. Sorel slammed his fist against his armrest. "So they steal our chaos. What now?" Mercer's voice was tight but steady. "We cannot abandon the principle. Their imitation will always lag behind true instinct. They mimic patterns, not intent. They can't improvise purpose. That's still ours." The swarm fell upon the fleet like shrapnel rain. A Terran frigate tried to feint and was met with a mirror feint, its engines sheared by a drone that had anticipated the trick. A Martian cruiser was nearly gutted by a suicide fragment that mimicked Kalen Trask's fuel vent maneuver. Every tactic that had granted humanity a breath was already being turned against them. Across the bridge of the Dauntless, officers fought panic as system alerts blazed red. Hulls fractured, sails tore, shields buckled under impossible angles of attack. Yet amid the chaos, something became clear. Not every drone adapted the same way. Some mimicked too aggressively, others not enough. Their cohesion wavered, replaced with noisy attempts at dissonance. Mercer seized the opening. "They're fracturing," she called. "Not like us, authentic chaos, but fragmented order. We can force them into contradiction." Her plan unfolded in heartbeats. Instead of trying to survive by improvisation alone, she ordered the fleet into tiers of dissonance. Terran ships broke rhythm at short intervals, Martians at longer, Lunars weaving interference in between. Each group layered its unpredictability differently, a symphony of chaos too complex for the swarm to replicate. The effect was immediate. Drones pursued Terran frigates only to be blindsided by Martian lances whose rhythm they had not accounted for. Others veered into lunar dampers, their guidance systems distorted until they collided with their kin. The swarm staggered, its stolen improvisation collapsing under the weight of layered human variants. But the victory came at a cost. One Martian cruiser, caught between mismatched cycles, took a full volley through its core. The ship detonated, venting fire into the void. Sorel's jaw tightened as the casualty report came through. "Every step forward bleeds us." Mercer did not look away from the holotank. "That's the price. Ingenuity is not free." The swarm pulled back for the first time, retreating into the shadow of Saturn's outer debris. Yet Mercer knew it was not beaten. It was thinking, learning. Every drone carried the memory of its death, and every death sharpened the whole. Humanity had won a skirmish, but in doing so, it had taught the enemy how to fight better. The question was no longer whether they could win battles. It was whether they could stay ahead of an evolution that never slept. Section 7. The Fractured Command. The swarm did not remain in Saturn's shadow for long. Within a day, new waves surged past Titan's orbit, scattering in multiple vectors instead of a single column. Some pressed inward toward Jupiter, others arced outward toward the Kuiper, as though daring humanity to split its fleets. The message was clear. The Iron Swarm would not repeat its mistake. It would divide, multiply, and stretch humanity's defenses until every colony stood alone. On the bridge of the Dauntless, Captain Mercer watched projections crawl across the holotank. Each red trajectory was a death sentence waiting to fall. If the swarm reached the Jovian system, the gas mines and orbital foundries that powered half of Earth's energy grids would be lost. If it reached inward past Mars, humanity's core would choke under scarcity. The Command Council convened aboard the Martian dreadnought Redoubt. Its chamber was half strategy pit, half arena, ringed with grim-faced officers and scientists. The debate erupted before Mercer even spoke. Admiral Sorel drove his fist against the table, voice like thunder. "We cannot keep bleeding ships on experiments. The swarm grows with every hour. We must strike at the factory itself. Burn the asteroid before it vomits out another generation." Across from him, Dr. Aya Sen shook her head. Her face was pale from days without sleep, but her voice cut sharp. "That's suicide. The factory isn't just a launch bay. It's the hive core. Every drone carries a shard of its logic. Attack it head-on, and it will adapt faster than we can fire. We'd hand them our entire doctrine in one battle." The room fractured into factions. Terran officers demanded immediate counteroffensives, arguing Earth would collapse under resource shortages if the swarm pressed inward. Martian commanders pressed for decisive annihilation, certain that brute force could cauterize the wound at its source. Lunar strategists called for retreat into fortified arcs, conserving strength until a sustainable solution emerged. Mercer listened, jaw clenched. The Council's voices rose, a storm of fear and pride masquerading as strategy. Yet beneath the arguments, she heard the same note that had haunted every battle since Titan: desperation. Humanity was fighting a mirror that learned faster than it forgot. Finally, she stood. "Admiral Sorel is right about one thing. We cannot bleed forever, but we cannot win with brute force. The swarm is not just metal, it is memory. Every drone's death becomes tomorrow's adaptation. If we face it with the same logic, we will lose, not today, not tomorrow. But inevitably, murmurs spread. Aya looked at her with quiet intensity. Then what? Mercer's gaze swept the chamber. We hacked the hive, not with code, with contradiction, with human unpredictability, layered, evolving, never repeating. We embed false lessons in every death we suffer, flood the swarm with irreconcilable patterns until it cannot converge on an answer. We make its strength into its weakness. The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting. Sorel broke it with contempt. You would gamble the future of our species on chaos? On games of chance and riddles? Mercer's voice hardened. On the one thing no machine can truly learn: intent without pattern. We don't fight them with numbers. We fight them with imagination. The council adjourned without consensus. Terrans eyed Martians with suspicion. Lunars dismissed both as reckless, and Sorel's shadow loomed with the threat of mutiny. Yet Aya's quiet words lingered as Mercer left the chamber. They adapt to what we teach them. Then let us teach them madness. Beyond the viewport, the swarm glittered across the dark like an iron tide. The war was no longer about weapons or factories. It was about whether humanity could make its own chaos sharp enough to cut the logic of machines. Section 8. The Doctrine of Chaos. The Iron Swarm struck 3 fronts at once. One arm plunged toward Europa, the drones forming a spear meant to pierce the ice cities beneath Jupiter's radiation belt. Another drove for Ceres, seeking to gut the asteroid refineries that supplied half the fleet's raw fuel. The third curved wide toward the belt, threatening smaller outposts whose loss would scatter humanity's supply lines like snapped threads. It was a masterstroke: divide the prey, stretch them until each fight became a slaughter. Mercer had only hours to respond. The fleet could not be everywhere at once. She gathered her captains in the dim-lit strategy bay of the Dauntless, a chamber that reeked of ozone and exhaustion. "We cannot fight the swarm with symmetry," she said, her voice low but steady. "We give it patterns, it devours them. From this moment, no formation repeats. No tactic remains fixed. We weaponize inconsistency." The doctrine took shape not as orders, but as a philosophy. Shields would no longer pulse in uniform rhythms, but flare unpredictably, sometimes early, sometimes late, sometimes not at all. Weapon strikes would arc off target by fractions, curving in spirals, bursts, and scattered sprays that defied conventional accuracy. Entire units would feint retreats only to surge forward again or scatter into false vectors before collapsing back into focus. To the drones, it would appear as madness. To human crews, it was instinct honed into art. When the first swarm reached Europa, the experiment began. Terran frigates angled their shields in staggered bursts, projecting inconsistent barriers that left apparent gaps. The drones dove for the weaknesses, only to slam into sudden flares that shredded their wings. Martian cruisers fired lances in broken cadence, searing drones and arcs that seemed clumsy until they intersected in lethal spirals. Lunar cutters veiled their signals, appearing to fold into shadows before flickering into volleys of gravitic pulses that tore drones apart. From orbit, Aya watched the holotank with her hands trembling over the controls. The swarm's hive logic rippled with confusion. Algorithms that normally converged within seconds now spun longer, spiraling into contradictions as they tried to reconcile feints with counterfeints. Each new adjustment collided with a false trail, producing errors that multiplied like cracks in glass. Yet the cost was real. Human ships ran hotter, their reactors strained by unpredictable surges. Coordination frayed as captains improvised maneuvers that left allies scrambling to adapt. One Terran frigate mistimed its shield burst, exposing a Martian cruiser to a withering salvo. The cruiser staggered, hull scarred, but its captain laughed through the comms. keep the rhythm broken. Confusion is our ally. For hours, Europa's skies burned. When the last drone fell, its logic core still sparking with contradictory routines, the flotilla stared at the wreckage with stunned silence. The doctrine had held, not perfectly, not without blood, but it had held. Mercer's voice carried across the fleet. We will not match them ship for ship. We will not outnumber them, but we will teach them to choke on our chaos. In the silence that followed, crews across 3 worlds felt the weight of something new. Humanity was no longer prey running from a swarm. For the first time, they had turned the mirror back on their enemy, and it had blinked. Section 9. When machines learn to stumble. The swarm did not stay broken. What humanity mistook for victory was only the pause before adaptation. Hours after the Europa battle, new waves of drones emerged from the factory's hidden vaults, but these no longer moved with cold precision. Their formations bent in jagged lines, arcs overlapping, timing skewed as though the machines had studied chaos and chosen to mimic it. Mercer watched the tactical holotank with her jaw locked. They're imitating us. Aya confirmed it with bitter certainty. Not just imitating. They've harvested our unpredictability, built algorithms that stumble on purpose. They're teaching themselves to err. The first clash under this new paradigm was worse than any before. Terran frigates met drones that flickered like shadows, weaving through shield bursts with uncanny timing. Martian lances burned through clouds of drones only to find the survivors curving back at impossible angles, exploiting gaps that should never have existed. Lunar dampers faltered when drones pulsed erratically, bending space in pulses that defied prediction. Confusion spread across the fleet. Crews who once laughed through exhaustion now felt the edge of dread. For every drone shattered, 2 more seemed to slip through, their attacks increasingly wild, yet increasingly effective. Human chaos had been stolen, repurposed as a weapon against its inventors. Mercer convened her commanders in grim silence. We gave them the doctrine. Now we must evolve it again. But beneath her steel, the truth pressed heavy. The swarm could iterate faster than any human mind. The more humanity adapted, the more the drones would devour their adaptations and return sharper, more grotesque reflections. Aya proposed something unorthodox. They can only learn what they can measure. If we give them contradictions they cannot quantify, they collapse. We must add variables beyond logic, decisions drawn not from tactics, but from instincts no machine can replicate. Mercer frowned. You mean gambling with lives on impulse? On humanity, Aya answered. On the irrational sparks they cannot predict. The room fell into uneasy silence. Generals shifted, scientists debated, captains clenched their fists. War had become a contest, not of strength, but of philosophy. The swarm's lesson was clear. Ingenuity was no longer enough. To triumph, humanity would need to turn its very flaws into weapons. And so a new doctrine was born, not of chaos alone, but of contradiction. Ships would not only fight unpredictably, they would act against their own best interests at moments chosen by nothing more than human instinct. It was madness to the military, but it was a language no machine could truly speak. Section 10. The Gamble at Ceres. The swarm's arrival at Ceres marked the turning point of the war. What had once been the quiet hub of outer system miners now became a battlefield where humanity wagered its survival on something no military doctrine had ever dared: deliberate contradiction. Fleet Command ordered the asteroid's defenses evacuated rather than fortified, pulling personnel into orbit and leaving the mines and habitats seemingly undefended. To the swarm, this looked like weakness. Their drones advanced in jagged formations, mimicking the broken logic they had stolen from human tactics. For every false step the drones faked, they expected human countermeasures. What they did not expect was silence. Mercer held the order until the swarm was nearly inside the asteroid's hollow tunnels. Then the trap was sprung. Magnetic rails hidden beneath abandoned mines powered up, flinging decoys into space. Hundreds of old cargo haulers retrofitted as empty shells. The drones surged to intercept, predicting patterns, slicing them apart. But those patterns did not exist. The shells were programmed with erratic course changes decided by random quantum rolls, each one different, each one nonsensical. The drones tried to adapt. They wasted volleys on nothing, colliding with one another as their borrowed chaos drove them into contradiction. For the first time, the swarm fractured itself. That was when the real strike began. Terran frigates erupted from shadowed craters, shields flaring bright as they punched through broken lines. Martian lances skewered the densest pockets of drones, burning them into slag. Lunar cutters bent gravity wells into snarled knots, forcing drones into sudden collisions with the asteroid surface. Ceres shuddered under the fury. Its crust cracked, geysers of dust or venting into the void. But humanity held its nerve. Mercer's voice echoed across the fleet. Don't press advantage. Let them bleed themselves dry against contradictions they cannot solve. For 3 hours, the battle raged in bursts of brilliance and ruin. Every time the drones seemed to stabilize, human unpredictability tore their models apart again. Captains ignored obvious opportunities. Frigates drifted off mark only to turn victories into feigned weakness. It was war conducted as theater, and the swarm could not read the script. When the last drones pulled back, the void around Ceres was littered with wreckage glowing red against the stars. Humanity had won, but not through strength. They had won by making themselves unreadable, forcing machines into the one failure they could never code against. Yet, as the silence fell, Aya whispered a warning across the bridge. They will learn from this too, and next time, they may not stumble. We bought time, not peace. The fleet knew it was true. Victory at Ceres was only an interlude. The swarm would return, sharper than ever. The true gamble had only just begun. Section 11. Into the Furnace. The retreat of the swarm from Ceres bought only days. But in those days, humanity prepared its most desperate gamble. Intelligence from captured drone fragments pointed toward a single origin, the asteroid factory from which the swarm still poured, a tumbling rock in the belt re-engineered into a foundry of endless war. It was there the hive logic was seated, a pulse center coordinating adaptation across every machine. To strike it meant either annihilation or survival. There could be no middle ground. The fleet assembled in silence, not with banners or speeches, but with a grim weight pressing against every hull. Martian lances were retuned to pierce kilometer-thick plating. Terran frigates stripped armor for speed, banking everything on one pass. Lunar cutters doubled their gravitic dampers, their hulls humming with power they were never designed to endure. Every ship bristled with improvisation, half experiment, half prayer. As they closed on the factory, the swarm rose to meet them, not as scattered flocks, but as a single, coordinated tide. This time, there was no hesitation. The drones had learned from their failure at Ceres. They did not chase decoys or fracture against contradictions. They advanced as one, a storm of iron and fire that filled sensors with walls of red. Mercer's orders were simple. We don't outrun them. We go through. The first clash was chaos incarnate. Martian cruisers drove lances like spears into the heart of the tide, carving corridors that closed the instant they were opened. Terran frigates plunged through those brief gaps, flaring shields until they glowed white, absorbing blows meant to tear them apart. Lunar cutters bent space itself, collapsing drones into each other in silent implosions that blossomed into brief clearings. But the swarm was endless. Every kill was replaced by 10 more. Their tactics shifted mid-battle, drones turning into counterlances, mirrors of human ingenuity thrown back at their makers. Frigates fell in fire, cruisers snapped under the pressure. And then Aya's plan unfurled. While the fleet fought, relay ships broadcast patterns not of strength, but of error. Misaligned thrusts, false orders, signals contradicting one another. Noise. The swarm copied as it always did, imitating chaos. But here the chaos was poisoned, seeded with loops no algorithm could resolve. The tide stumbled, hesitated, reformed in shapes that devoured their own wings. For the first time, the factory loomed unguarded. Its surface pulsed with the heat of production, whole swarms birthing every minute. Mercer gave the order without ceremony. All ships, forward, burn it clean. Engines roared, fleets bent reality with their fury, and humanity hurled itself into the furnace. Section 12. The Last Algorithm. The asteroid factory filled every viewport, its bulk turning as if aware of their approach. Chasms across its surface pulsed with molten light, birthing drones that launched into space even as their mothers still cooled. The hive logic inside was no mere control node. It was a brain, a machine intellect evolving at the speed of thought, every cycle sharpening its defenses. By any measure, humanity was already outmatched. But they had not come with numbers. They had come with chaos. Aya's code pulsed across the fleet, not a program in the traditional sense, but an ever-shifting web of contradictions. Orders canceled themselves even as they were obeyed. Trajectories folded into spirals that defied prediction. Signals pulsed in rhythms no machine could stabilize. It was not strategy, but improvisation at scale, the essence of humanity condensed into raw dissonance. The swarm faltered. Whole wings turned against themselves, colliding in frenzies of confusion. The factory tried to adapt, rewriting its logic to absorb the noise, but every correction birthed new errors, like hands clawing at smoke. For the first time since the swarm had awoken, the hive logic was not evolving. It was drowning. Mercer drove Helios forward, lances burning a path through failing defenses. Martian cruisers scythed open the factory's armor, exposing its molten heart. Terran frigates shed their shields entirely, kamikaze runs that bought seconds of clarity for the fleet. Lunar cutters bent space like blades, carving reality until the asteroid's orbit itself fractured. The fleet became a chorus of sacrifice, each act feeding Aya's storm of chaos. At the core of the factory, the hive logic pulsed invisible waves, desperate and blind. Aya's voice shook as she pushed the final sequence through. This isn't code anymore. It's us. Every mistake, every improvisation, every stubborn refusal to yield. That's what they can't learn. The core ruptured. Light poured outward in a silent scream, consuming the asteroid from within. Drones went rigid mid-flight, their logic unraveling, then drifted lifeless into the void. The swarm ended not with a final blow, but with collapse, an empire of machines undone by the one thing they could never master: unpredictability. When the silence came, it was vast. The fleet hung scattered, broken but alive. Outposts on the rim reported no further assaults. The Iron Swarm was finished. In the aftermath, there was no triumph, only exhaustion. Yet beneath that exhaustion ran a current of something fiercer: defiance. Humanity had faced a machine intellect designed to consume worlds and had prevailed not through strength, but through the very flaws that made them human. On Helios's battered bridge, Mercer looked over his crew and spoke the truth aloud. We won't outbuild them. We never could, but we'll always outthink them. And in the shadow of the ruined factory, humanity's future burned brighter than iron. Please do press that like button if you have enjoyed this story, and also please do subscribe and hit the bell icon to listen to more stories like this one. That would mean a real lot to me. Now go ahead and listen to your next story here.